22 years after the murder of Marion Crane, Norman Bates is released from prison.
What about his victims?
His psychiatrist drives him to his old house at the Bates Motel and wishes him luck, convinced that the once notorious murderer has been rehabilitated and has done proper penance for his hideous crimes. Norman gets a job at the local diner. He's shown around by the kindly waitress, Mrs. Spool. He also meets a young waitress named Mary. Norman overhears Mary having an argument with her boyfriend. Realizing she doesn't have a place to stay, he extends her an offer, a night of rest at the Bates Motel. She accepts forthwith. We meet the motel's new owner, Mr. Toomey. Norman is disgusted to discover his motel has become a pit stop for drug addicts and fornicators. He fires Mr. Toomey on the spot, much to the meatball's chagrin.
What'd yours get, Bates, huh? Dead! That's what they got! Dead! Murdered by you loony!
At home, Norman offers Mary a sandwich. Mary reveals she knows about Norman's past. Despite her fears, Norman charms her with tall guy Riz.
Never given me a job in a diner, would they?
The next day at the diner, Mr. Toomey shows up and screams at Norman and harasses Mary. Norman finds a note from his mother. We get an epic title drop.
Oh, that's beautiful. Go on, Psycho. Pick it up. Come on, pick it up.
Despite all Norman's best efforts, the world seems to be taunting him to return to his old ways. Norman receives a mysterious phone call from someone claiming to be his mother. Meanwhile, at the motel, Mr. Toomey receives his severance pay. Norman is visited by a psychiatrist who gives Mary a lift into town. Two teenagers sneak into the Bates house and get their Friday the 13th style retribution. The sheriff stops by to investigate the disappearance of the two teenagers. Mary provides an alibi to cover for Norman. Norman himself doesn't seem convinced that he didn't have something to do with it.
Norman?
It's starting again.
It is soon revealed that Mary is the daughter of Lila Loomis, the sister of Marion Crane. Lila is seeking revenge for her slain sister, and the two have been conspiring to gaslight Norman and draw him out into murdering again. However, Mary has developed feelings for Norman and wants to protect him, believing him to be a good person. Blood flows from the toilet and Mary cleans up. Mary finds someone spying on her. Or does she? It couldn't have been Norman. Is there somebody else in the house with them? Mary calms Norman and cradles him like a mother would. The psychiatrist drops in. He tells Norman he knows what Lila Loomis is doing and warns him about her daughter. The psychiatrist takes Norman to a cemetery and digs up the grave of Mrs. Bates, proving she is dead. Norman has a hard time accepting it, but he does. Norman continues to receive phone calls claiming it's his other mother. A frustrated Mary dresses up in mother's clothes and gets on the line to prove to Norman it is all in his head. The psychiatrist leaps from the shadows, trying to catch her in the act. He catches something in the chest instead and tumbles to a grisly end. The comedy of errors continues as Norman approaches Mary and she tries to defend herself, slicing Norman's hand. In the fruit cellar, she discovers the body of her mother, killed by an unknown assailant. The police arrive. Mary meets her end. At the police station, the sheriff reveals Lila Loomis's plot, believing Norman vindicated. Back at home, Norman receives an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Spool from the diner, who reveals she is Norman's real mother, his biological one, who is hidden from him as a child. She herself had been in an asylum. Apparently, mental illness runs in the family. It was she who killed Mr. Toomey and Lila Loomis and the teenagers. She was just trying to protect her son from those who were trying to hurt him. Norman repays the debt. Norman stores the corpse in the master bedroom. The circle closes. Norman Bates is back home. With Psycho 2, Richard Franklin creates a sequel that deliberately parallels the original, but in the inverse. Here, as in the original, there is a mid-film twist that completely changes our idea of what it is that we've been watching. We thought we were following Marion Crane, but not so. Similarly, Psycho 2 reorientates us halfway through, revealing that Norman is being gaslit and ultimately is not the one responsible for the murders at all. It's a very successful twist that gives the movie a completely different identity than the original. Is it as masterfully done as the original? No, but it is engaging and keeps you guessing. Where Psycho 2 stumbles is in the final stretch, as it attempts to replicate the shocking twist at the end of the original. Unfortunately, the idea that Norman has a different mother who is also killing people is an absurd leap of logic. It feels like the twist at the end of the original Friday the 13th. But whereas a silly twist works in that kind of movie, here it feels out of place, one twist too far. The Psycho series feels too grounded in realism for that kind of nonsense. What's frustrating is that the film would only require a slight adjustment to fix it. Perhaps Miss Spool, who sounds like a character from Clue, shows up at the end, but not to reveal to Norman that she's been killing people. Maybe she is related to him. She could be his aunt or his grandmother. The purpose of the final twist is to emphasize Norman's status in this film as the victim, a victim of the crazy mother figures in his life, and to make a statement about how maybe it's really society that's crazy or some such shit.
But if Norman Bates is crazy, there are a whole lot of people around here running him a close second.
In this version, Mrs. Spool would reveal that she didn't want the responsibility of raising a child, so she gave him to his mother even though she knew she wasn't the most mentally stable person. Mrs. Spool called Norman a couple of times throughout the movie, working up the courage to reveal the truth to him. Maybe she even left the note at the diner, trying to warn Norman of bad influences, people she knew to be hiding something. Norman repays the favor. With this version of the scene, Norman's act of violence comes as much more of a surprise. The film ends the same way, with the iconic final shot. Some people claim Psycho 2 is better than the original. These people have been huffing paint fumes. Psycho 2 is good for Psycho 2. But it's grounded by a decent performance by Anthony Perkins. It's strange to watch him in this movie. Considering the time gap from the original, he almost seems like a different person, even though the style of the film is relatively subdued and non-showy. In the plotting, it attempts to be as twisty as some of those Hitchcock classics, like Vertigo. The performances are good. Dennis Franz is suitably Dennis Franzy. The violence in the film feels more in keeping with 80s slasher films of the time. If you think it's comparable to Hitchcock, I don't know what to tell you, other than you may have a terminal case of 80s brain rot. By the standards of what was supposed to be a made-for-TV sequel to one of the greatest films of all time, it exists in the pantheon of pretty good sequels alongside Homeward Bound 2 and Psycho 3. Speaking of which...